Welcome back to Hopeful Horizon, where we bring you stories that warm the heart and challenge the mind. Today's story is about honesty, prejudice, and the power of truth. It begins with a simple act of kindness, a young boy returning a lost wallet that should have been celebrated, but instead, it led to mistrust and accusations. What unfolds in the days that follow is a powerful reminder of how quick judgments and prejudice can tear people apart. But stay with us as we explore how the courage to stand by the truth can bring unexpected healing, even in the most unjust of circumstances. If you love stories filled with twists, life lessons, and heartwarming moments, be sure to comment below and let us know where you're tuning in from. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss an inspiring story from Hopeful Horizon. Isaiah walked home from school along the familiar cracked sidewalks of his neighborhood. The air was crisp, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows from the towering oak trees lining the street. His worn-out sneakers shuffled against the pavement as he passed the small grocery store where his mother sometimes sent him to pick up milk or bread. At 12 years old, Isaiah was used to being independent, helping his single mom run errands whenever she needed. As he approached the corner of Elm Street, something caught his eye. A brown leather wallet, old and weathered, lying near the curb. He hesitated for a moment before kneeling down to pick it up. Glancing around, he saw no one nearby. Flipping it open, he noticed the driver's license of an elderly man, some credit cards, and a couple of bills. Isaiah thought for a moment. He could take the money, no one would know, but that wasn't who he was. His mom had always taught him that integrity was everything. Without a second thought, he snapped the wallet shut and looked at the address on the ID. Just a few blocks away, he muttered to himself. The sun dipped lower in the sky as he made his way toward the elderly man's house. The houses in this part of the neighborhood were older, the paint on most of them chipped, and the gardens overgrown. But there was a quaint charm to them, decades of history etched into their foundations. When Isaiah finally arrived, he rang the doorbell and waited. After a minute, the door creaked open, revealing a frail-looking man in his 70s. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he wore thick glasses that magnified his pale blue eyes. The man peered out cautiously. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice gravelly but polite. Isaiah cleared his throat. "Hi, sir. I found your wallet on the ground near Elm Street and figured you might want it back." He extended the wallet toward the man. The old man blinked in surprise, then slowly reached out to take it. He looked from Isaiah to the wallet and back again, as if trying to process what was happening. "Thank you," he said after a long pause, his voice softened by the surprise of the gesture. Isaiah gave a small smile and nodded. "No problem. Have a good day, sir." Without waiting for more conversation, Isaiah turned and began walking back home. His chest felt lighter. He hadn't done anything extraordinary, but it felt good to know he'd done the right thing. The next day began like any other. Isaiah was getting ready for school, hurriedly packing his backpack while his mother, Denise, stood in the kitchen, sipping her morning coffee. "Hurry up, Isaiah. You don't want to be late again," she called, watching him dart around the small living room. "I'm almost ready, Ma," he shouted back, stuffing his notebook into his bag. He grabbed an apple from the counter and headed toward the door. Just as Isaiah was about to leave, there was a loud knock at the front door, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the house. Denise frowned and set her coffee down, glancing at the clock. It was unusual for someone to knock so early. She opened the door cautiously, only to be greeted by the sight of 2 uniformed police officers standing on the porch, with the elderly man from the previous day behind them. Her heart skipped a beat. "Ma'am," one of the officers began, his tone formal, "we need to ask your son some questions." Denise's face paled, and her protective instincts immediately kicked in. "What's this about? Why are the police here?" she demanded, stepping slightly in front of Isaiah, who had come to stand by her side. The elderly man, Mr. Hendricks, stepped forward. His face, once calm when Isaiah had returned the wallet, now twisted with suspicion. "This boy," he pointed at Isaiah, "gave me my wallet back yesterday, but I'm missing some money. I didn't realize it at first, but I think he might have taken it." Denise's jaw tightened. She turned to Isaiah, her voice steady but laced with worry. "Isaiah, what is this about?" Isaiah's eyes widened in shock. "I didn't take anything, Ma. I found his wallet and gave it back. That's all." The police officers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but obligated to investigate the elderly man's complaint. One of them turned to Isaiah. "Son, is there any truth to what this man is saying? Did you take anything out of the wallet before returning it?" Isaiah shook his head vehemently, his voice rising with frustration. "No. I found it near the grocery store and brought it back to him. I didn't take anything." Denise put a hand on Isaiah's shoulder, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the elderly man. "My son would never steal. If you're missing money, you need to look elsewhere." Mr. Hendricks crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "I know how much money was in that wallet, and after your boy gave it back to me, some of it was gone. I just want what's mine." The tension hung thick in the air, the officers looking between the two families with uncertainty. Denise knew they were going to have to fight to prove her son's innocence, but for now, the cloud of suspicion had been cast, and it wasn't going away easily. The tension at the front door was thick enough to cut with a knife. Denise stood firm, her hand on Isaiah's shoulder, as she stared down the officers and Mr. Hendricks. Her son had always been an honest boy, and the idea of him being accused of theft cut deep. "Officer," Denise said, her voice firm but measured, "I can assure you my son didn't take anything. He's not a thief, and if Mr. Hendricks is missing money, it's got nothing to do with Isaiah." The officer, sensing the rising emotions, raised his hand slightly, trying to keep the situation calm. "Ma'am, we just need to ask a few questions. If what your son says is true, this will all be cleared up soon." Isaiah, standing quietly next to his mother, felt a mixture of fear and anger. Why wasn't the man thankful that he'd returned the wallet at all? He had done the right thing. Why did it feel like he was being punished for it? "Look," Isaiah spoke up, his voice stronger now. "I didn't take any money. I gave him the wallet exactly how I found it. If he's missing something, maybe he lost it before I even found it." Mr. Hendricks shifted uncomfortably, his arms still crossed over his chest. "I don't know, boy. It seems too convenient. First, my wallet's gone, then you show up out of nowhere to return it, and now money's missing. I don't like it. I know how much was in there, and it's not adding up." Denise's patience was wearing thin. "How much money are we talking about, Mr. Hendricks?" she asked, her tone sharp. The elderly man frowned. "There was at least $200 in there, and now there's barely 50. Denise shook her head, disbelief clear on her face. "You're accusing a 12-year-old of stealing $150? He's a child. Do you think he's some criminal mastermind who concocted a plan to return your wallet just to take your money?" The officer standing closest to the elderly man cleared his throat. "Sir, is it possible the money was missing before the wallet was returned? Maybe it fell out when you lost it?" Mr. Hendricks glanced at the ground, unsure. "I don't know," he muttered. "I could have sworn I had all of it." "Sworn or not," Denise said, her voice steady, "you need to stop accusing my son of something he didn't do. He did the right thing by bringing your wallet back, and now you're repaying him with this nonsense." Before anyone could say anything else, Isaiah spoke again. "I gave you the wallet back in front of the grocery store," he said, looking at Mr. Hendricks. "There's a security camera right there by the door. If they check the footage, they'll see me handing you the wallet." The officers exchanged a glance, and one of them nodded. "That could help clear things up. If there's footage of the interaction, we can get a better idea of what happened." Mr. Hendricks looked unsure, his confidence wavering now. "Footage," he repeated. "I didn't realize there was a camera." Denise stepped forward slightly. "There is, and it'll show my son didn't take anything from you." One of the officers spoke up again, addressing Mr. Hendricks. "Sir, we'll need to check that footage before we take any further action. If Isaiah returned the wallet, as he said, it's possible the money was lost before he found it." The elderly man opened his mouth to protest, but closed it again, realizing there wasn't much more he could say without sounding paranoid. He simply nodded, though his face was still etched with suspicion. "We'll head over to the store now and review the footage," the officer said, stepping back. "Ma'am, we'll follow up with you once we have more information. In the meantime, there's no need to escalate this further." Denise gave a curt nod, her hand still protectively on Isaiah's shoulder. "Good, and I expect an apology when this is all over." The officers nodded, giving the family a respectful nod before turning to leave with Mr. Hendricks in tow. The elderly man hesitated before walking away, his eyes flickering to Isaiah one last time, as if searching for some sign of guilt. But Isaiah stood tall, his chin raised defiantly. As the door shut, Denise exhaled a long breath and turned to her son. "You okay, baby?" Isaiah nodded, though his heart was still pounding in his chest. "Yeah, Ma, I didn't do anything wrong. Why'd he think I took his money?" Denise knelt down in front of Isaiah, looking him square in the eyes. People like him, they jump to conclusions. And sometimes it's not about what you did or didn't do. It's about what they think of you before you even say a word. Isaiah frowned, not quite understanding but feeling the weight of his mother's words. "But I just wanted to help." "I know, sweetheart." Denise hugged him tightly. "And you did. You did the right thing. It's his problem that he can't see that." They sat in silence for a few moments, the fear and frustration slowly ebbing away. Isaiah felt safe in his mother's arms, but a part of him still felt uneasy. Would the footage really clear his name? And even if it did, would Mr. Hendricks ever see him as anything other than a thief? The next morning, Isaiah's home was filled with a tense quiet. Denise had stayed up late, calling friends and family to vent about the previous day's events. They all agreed it was ridiculous. How could anyone accuse Isaiah of stealing when he had clearly returned the wallet? Isaiah, however, wasn't as sure. Though his mother had tried to comfort him, the weight of being accused still lingered in his chest. What if the footage didn't prove anything? What if people always saw him as guilty no matter what he did? As the clock ticked closer to noon, a knock came at the door. Denise, who had been tidying up the living room, paused and glanced at Isaiah before heading to the door. When she opened it, she saw one of the officers from the day before standing alongside Mr. Hendricks. "Ma'am," the officer said, his tone calm and reassuring. "We reviewed the footage from the store. I'm here to let you know that Isaiah did exactly what he said. The footage shows him handing the wallet back to Mr. Hendricks with nothing taken from it." Denise let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, relief washing over her. "I told you," she said, her voice firm. "My son didn't steal anything." The officer nodded. "I'm sorry for the trouble, ma'am. Mr. Hendricks has something to say as well." The elderly man stepped forward, his face softened from the rigid suspicion it had held the day before. I owe you and your boy an apology," he said, his voice low. "I jumped to conclusions and I was wrong. I'm sorry." Isaiah stood by his mother's side, listening to the apology with a mix of emotions. He wasn't sure if it was enough, but hearing the man admit his mistake made the knot in his stomach loosen just a little. Denise crossed her arms, her face still stern. "You're lucky we didn't press charges for false accusations. Next time, think before you assume the worst about someone just because of the color of their skin." Mr. Hendricks looked down, his face flushed with shame. "You're right. I didn't see it clearly. I'll do better." The truth had been revealed, but the scars left behind weren't so easily healed. Isaiah had been vindicated, but the experience stayed with him, a reminder of how quick the world could turn on someone based on nothing more than a hasty judgment. Even though the truth had come out, Isaiah couldn't shake the feeling of distrust that still lingered in the air. He felt like people were still looking at him sideways, even if no one said it outright. The encounter with Mr. Hendricks had left a mark, one deeper than he cared to admit. A few days after the ordeal, Isaiah sat quietly in his room, thinking over everything. He had tried to forget it, to push the memory of the police at his door aside, but every time he closed his eyes, the accusations resurfaced. The shame and fear had sunk deep into his heart, and even though he knew he'd done the right thing, it was hard to feel proud about it. "Isaiah?" His mother's voice called from the hallway, pulling him from his thoughts. "Yeah, Ma," he responded, his voice low as he stared out the window. Denise entered the room and sat beside him on the bed, her face softened with concern. "You okay? You've been quiet the past few days." Isaiah shrugged, keeping his eyes on the street below. "I don't know. It just feels weird. Like, even though the police know I didn't take anything, I still feel like I did something wrong." Denise sighed, wrapping her arm around his shoulders. "I know, baby, it's hard. It doesn't feel fair, does it?" He shook his head. "I thought returning the wallet was the right thing to do." but it feels like I just made things worse. Maybe I should have just left it." Denise frowned, pulling him a little closer. "Don't say that. You did the right thing. You were honest, and that's what matters. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like doing the right thing is wrong. That's their problem, not yours." Isaiah let out a breath, feeling some of the weight lift from his chest, but it still wasn't enough to erase the pain. I don't get why he thought I took his money. Like, why me?" Denise paused for a moment, carefully choosing her words. "Sometimes people make assumptions based on things that have nothing to do with you. They see your skin, your age, and they jump to conclusions without even thinking. It's not right, but that's the world we live in." Isaiah frowned. "But that's not fair." Denise nodded, her expression solemn. "You're right, it's not. But it's why we have to keep proving them wrong. You showed Mr. Hendricks that he was wrong about you. And even though it hurt, you didn't let it change who you are." Isaiah's eyes softened as he looked up at his mother, appreciating her words, but still feeling a pit in his stomach. "I just wish it didn't happen in the first place." Denise smiled sadly. "Me too, baby. Me too." The following week, Isaiah returned to school, still carrying the weight of the incident. Word had spread around the neighborhood about what had happened, and though his classmates didn't bring it up directly, he could feel their stares. Some of the kids whispered about it behind his back, and others just looked at him with wide eyes, unsure of how to talk to him after hearing about the police at his door. "Hey, Isaiah," a familiar voice called from behind him one afternoon as he left the school building. He turned to see his best friend Marcus jogging up to him with a smile. Marcus was one of the few people who hadn't treated Isaiah any differently since the wallet incident. In fact, he'd been one of the first to check in on Isaiah after hearing about it. "Hey," Isaiah said, giving Marcus a small nod. "You heading home?" Marcus asked, falling into step beside him. "Yeah, just trying to get out of here. It's been a long day," Isaiah muttered, kicking a small rock as they walked. Marcus frowned. "People still giving you weird looks?" Isaiah sighed. "Kind of. They're not saying anything, but you can tell they're thinking about it." "Man, don't worry about them. You didn't do anything wrong, and anyone who knows you knows that." Marcus gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Yeah, I know. It's just hard, you know?" Isaiah responded. "It's like people are waiting for me to mess up or something." Marcus was quiet for a moment before speaking again. "You know, what happened to you wasn't right, but at least now, people know you're not someone who would do that. It's going to take time, but eventually, it'll blow over. They'll forget all about it." Isaiah gave a half-hearted shrug. "Maybe." "Plus, you got the footage on your side," Marcus added with a grin. "Not many people can say they have video proof they're innocent." Isaiah chuckled softly, appreciating Marcus's attempt to lighten the mood. "Yeah, I guess that's true." As they reached Isaiah's block, Marcus waved him off. "See you tomorrow, man, and don't let them get to you." Isaiah waved back, feeling a little lighter after the conversation. But as he walked up to his house, his mind wandered back to Mr. Hendricks. The apology had come, sure, but Isaiah couldn't shake the feeling that the damage had already been done. He had been seen as guilty before he had even had the chance to speak. Later that evening, as Isaiah sat in his room trying to focus on homework, there was a knock at the front door. Curious, he got up and wandered out to the living room, where his mom was already answering it. To his surprise, standing there was Mr. Hendricks, this time without the police or any accusations. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped as if weighed down by something. "Mrs. Turner," he began, his voice softer than before, I wanted to come by and thank Isaiah." Denise's brow furrowed, unsure of where this was going. "Thank him? For what?" "For doing the right thing, and for being honest, even when I wasn't," Mr. Hendricks continued, his gaze falling to the floor. "I was wrong. I know I already apologized, but I wanted to say it again, and to tell you both that, well, that I'm grateful. I don't think I would have gotten my wallet back if it wasn't for your son." Isaiah stood in the hallway, listening quietly, unsure of how to feel. On one hand, he appreciated the apology, but on the other, it didn't erase what had happened. Denise nodded slowly. "Well, we appreciate you saying that, Mr. Hendricks." There was a brief silence before the elderly man turned to leave. But just before he stepped off the porch, he stopped and turned back to Isaiah. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, young man. Don't let the world make you think otherwise." Isaiah blinked, surprised by the words. "Thank you," he mumbled, unsure of what else to say. And with that, Mr. Hendricks left, disappearing into the fading evening light. The days that followed Mr. Hendricks's second visit were quieter, but the incident still lingered in Isaiah's mind. Despite the old man's apology, Isaiah wasn't sure how to feel. The gesture had been sincere, yet the scars of that day were still fresh. It was one thing to hear words of regret, but it was another to move past the feeling of being wrongfully accused. Isaiah tried to focus on his daily routine, school, homework, helping his mom around the house, but the weight of the past weeks lingered like a dark cloud. Every time he passed by a group of kids at school, he wondered if they were talking about him. He hadn't been able to shake that sense of being watched, judged, even after everything had been cleared up. It wasn't until a couple of weeks later that something unexpected happened. One Saturday morning, Isaiah was sitting at the kitchen table, quietly eating his cereal while his mom hummed to the radio. The sun streamed through the window, casting a warm light over the small but cozy room. It was a peaceful moment, one Isaiah was grateful for. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Isaiah glanced up, confused. They weren't expecting anyone. Denise raised an eyebrow and wiped her hands on a dish towel before heading toward the door. When she opened it, both she and Isaiah froze. Standing on the doorstep was Mr. Hendricks again, but this time he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a woman, dressed in a neat suit, holding a folder in her hands. "Good morning, Mrs. Turner," Mr. Hendricks greeted with a smile, far more relaxed than the last time they'd seen him. Denise glanced at Isaiah, then back at Mr. Hendricks. "Good morning. Is everything okay?" Mr. Hendricks chuckled softly. "Yes, everything's fine. I know this is unexpected, but I wanted to come by and discuss something with you and Isaiah. May we come in?" Denise hesitated, looking over at Isaiah, who was equally puzzled. After a moment, she stepped aside. "Of course. Come in." Isaiah sat up straighter as Mr. Hendricks and the woman entered the living room. His eyes were drawn to the folder in the woman's hands, wondering what this was all about. They all settled in the small living room, with Mr. Hendricks and the woman sitting on the couch, opposite Isaiah and his mom. There was an awkward silence at first, before Mr. Hendricks cleared his throat. "I wanted to thank Isaiah once again," he began. "I know I've apologized before, but I don't think I can ever truly express how grateful I am for his honesty. I realize now that I jumped to conclusions, and I've been thinking a lot about how I can make things right." Denise folded her arms, her expression cautious. "You've already apologized, Mr. Hendricks. What more could you do?" The woman beside Mr. Hendricks spoke up this time. "My name is Ms. Richards, and I represent Mr. Hendricks' estate. He's made a decision regarding a matter of great importance to him." Isaiah frowned, confused. Estate? What was going on? Mr. Hendricks smiled kindly at Isaiah. "You see, Isaiah, I don't have any children or close family. For years, I've been wondering what to do with what I have left. My house, my savings. I've lived a long life, but I don't want what I've worked for to go to waste after I'm gone." Isaiah blinked, his confusion only growing. "I've decided," Mr. Hendricks continued, "that I'd like to set up a trust fund in your name, Isaiah, to help with your education, your future, whatever you need as you grow into the man you're destined to be." The words hung in the air like a bombshell. Denise's eyes widened, and Isaiah stared at Mr. Hendricks, struggling to process what he had just heard. "A trust fund?" Denise asked, her voice shaky with surprise. "For Isaiah?" Mr. Hendricks nodded. "Yes, I know it can't erase what happened, but I want to make sure Isaiah has the opportunities he deserves. I've seen enough of the world to know how unfair it can be, especially for young men like him. This is my way of giving back, of trying to right a wrong." Isaiah's mind was spinning. A trust fund? For him? He didn't know what to say. He'd never imagined something like this would happen, especially after the way Mr. Hendricks had treated him before. It was hard to wrap his head around the idea that the same man who had called the police on him was now offering him such a life-changing gift. Denise looked over at Isaiah, her expression torn between shock and gratitude. Isaiah, what do you think? Isaiah swallowed, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on him. I don't know, he admitted honestly. It's a lot. Mr. Hendricks nodded in understanding. I know it is, and I don't expect you to decide anything right away. Take your time. Talk it over with your mom. But just know, Isaiah, that I see a bright future for you, and I want to help you get there. Ms. Richards opened the folder and handed a few papers to Denise. This is all the information you'll need. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Denise took the papers with slightly trembling hands, still in disbelief over what was happening. This is incredibly generous of you, Mr. Hendricks. He smiled softly. It's the least I can do. Isaiah remained quiet, still trying to make sense of everything. Part of him wanted to reject the offer, feeling conflicted about accepting help from someone who had hurt him. But another part of him, one that had dreamed of going to college and building a future, couldn't ignore the opportunity this presented. After a few more moments of conversation, Mr. Hendricks and Ms. Richards stood to leave, offering their final words before stepping out the door. Isaiah watched them go, his mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts. Denise sat back down beside Isaiah, still holding the papers in her hands. I don't know what to say, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Isaiah shook his head. Me neither. They sat in silence for a while, both of them trying to process what had just happened. It was an opportunity that could change everything for Isaiah, but it also carried the weight of everything that had happened before. Could he really accept something like this from Mr. Hendricks? Only time would tell. Isaiah sat by his bedroom window that night, staring out into the quiet street. The streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and the sound of a distant car engine was the only thing disturbing the stillness. His mind, however, was far from peaceful. The trust fund, Mr. Hendricks's offer. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about it all day. The moment had felt surreal, like something out of a dream, or maybe a movie. But it was real. The papers his mom had held in her hands were proof of that. Isaiah sighed and leaned his forehead against the cool glass of the window. His thoughts kept cycling back to the same question. Could he accept it? Could he accept this massive gesture from a man who had once looked at him with such distrust? A man who had called the police on him simply because of the color of his skin? A knock on his door pulled him from his thoughts. Isaiah? His mom's voice was soft. Can I come in? Yeah, he replied, sitting up straight. Denise entered the room, her eyes filled with concern, as she took a seat at the foot of his bed. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of the day's events hanging heavily between them. What are you thinking? Denise finally asked, her tone gentle. Isaiah shrugged. I don't know, Mom. It's a lot. I mean, why now? Why does Mr. Hendricks suddenly want to help me after what he did? Denise nodded, understanding his hesitation. I've been thinking about that too. I think he's genuinely sorry, Isaiah. People make mistakes, and sometimes it takes them a while to realize how deep those mistakes run. Isaiah frowned, still unsure. But it doesn't feel right. He judged me. He called the cops on me without even giving me a chance to explain. And now he wants to give me all this money like it's going to fix everything. Denise sighed and looked down at her hands. You're right. Money doesn't fix everything, and it doesn't erase what happened. But maybe this is his way of trying to do better, of making sure you have the chances he knows you deserve. Isaiah was quiet for a long time, mulling over her words. He wanted to believe that Mr. Hendricks had changed, that he truly regretted what he'd done. But the hurt from that day still stung, and it was hard to push past the memory of the police standing on their porch, accusing him of theft. I just don't want to feel like I'm taking a handout, Isaiah said after a while. I don't want to feel like I'm only getting help because of what happened. Denise moved closer to him, her voice firm, but compassionate. This isn't a handout, Isaiah. You earned this. You did the right thing when you returned that wallet. You showed more character and integrity than most people would. Mr. Hendricks sees that now, and he wants to help you because he knows you deserve it. Isaiah sighed again, his shoulders slumping. But it still feels weird. Denise smiled softly. Of course, it does. It's a complicated situation, but you don't have to decide right now. We have time to think about it, to talk it over. Isaiah appreciated his mom's patience and wisdom. She had always been good at helping him see things from different angles, at guiding him through tough decisions without pushing him in any one direction. He knew she wanted the best for him, and he trusted her judgment. "I don't know what to do," Isaiah admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Denise reached out and squeezed his hand. "Whatever you decide, Isaiah, I'll support you. This is your life, your future. You get to choose the path you want to take." Isaiah nodded, though his mind was still a whirlwind of confusion and doubt. The trust fund could open so many doors for him. College had always felt like a distant dream, something he wasn't sure they could afford. But now, with Mr. Hendricks's offer, that dream was within reach. He could go to school, get a degree, and build the future he had always imagined. But accepting the trust fund also felt like accepting what had happened that day, like saying it was okay, when it wasn't. Could he reconcile those two things? Could he move forward without feeling like he had compromised his values? As the night wore on, Isaiah's thoughts continued to circle, and sleep remained elusive. The next morning, Isaiah woke up groggy and unrested. The dilemma still weighed on him, but he knew he couldn't avoid it forever. He decided to talk to his mom again after school, hoping that maybe, with a little more time, things would become clearer. At school, he found it hard to focus on his classes. His mind kept wandering back to Mr. Hendricks and the trust fund. The more he thought about it, the more he felt the pressure of the decision looming over him. By lunchtime, Isaiah was sitting alone in the cafeteria, picking at his food. He didn't feel like talking to anyone, not even his friends. The noise of the crowded room buzzed around him, but he felt isolated, as if he were in a bubble. Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to see a text message from his mom. "Mom, hey honey, I've been thinking about what we talked about last night. I want you to know, whatever decision you make, we'll figure it out together. You're not alone in this." Isaiah read the message twice, a sense of comfort washing over him. He smiled faintly. His mom had always been his rock, and knowing she had his back gave him some of the strength he needed to face the decision ahead. Still, the doubts lingered. After school, Isaiah decided to take a long walk home instead of catching the bus. He needed the fresh air, the time to clear his mind and think. The streets were quiet as he walked, his footsteps echoing softly on the pavement. He passed by familiar houses, trees swaying gently in the breeze, but his thoughts were miles away. As he walked, Isaiah found himself heading toward the part of town where Mr. Hendricks lived. He hadn't meant to come this way, but his feet had led him here nonetheless. Stopping at the edge of the street, he looked up at the old man's house, the very place where all of this had begun. The house was large and stately, sitting on a well-manicured lawn. Isaiah felt a strange mix of emotions as he stood there: anger, confusion, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of understanding. Mr. Hendricks had wronged him, yes, but Isaiah couldn't deny that the old man was trying to make amends. Maybe that didn't erase what had happened, but it was something. And maybe, just maybe, Isaiah could find it in himself to accept that. Taking a deep breath, Isaiah turned away from the house and headed home, still unsure of what he would decide, but feeling a little less weighed down by the burden of the choice. Isaiah walked home, his thoughts a little clearer, but still heavy with the weight of his decision. The streets were quieter now, the sun beginning to set and casting long shadows over the neighborhood. As he neared his house, the familiar sight of his front porch brought a small sense of comfort. When he stepped inside, the smell of his mom's cooking filled the air. Denise was in the kitchen, moving about with the ease of someone who had spent years perfecting her craft. Isaiah smiled faintly, realizing how much he appreciated these small moments, the warmth of home, the certainty of his mother's support, and the quiet peace they shared in each other's company. "Hey, Mom," Isaiah called as he dropped his backpack by the door. Denise turned, her face lighting up with a soft smile. "Hey, honey, how was school?" Isaiah shrugged as he made his way into the kitchen. "It was fine, just a lot on my mind." Denise nodded knowingly. "You've got a big decision to make. I know it's not easy." Isaiah sat down at the kitchen table, watching his mom move around the kitchen as she prepared dinner. The clatter of pots and pans, the sizzling of something frying on the stove. It all felt so normal, so routine, and yet nothing about Isaiah's life felt routine anymore. Do you think I should take it? Isaiah asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the comfortable silence. He wasn't sure what answer he expected, but he knew he needed to hear his mom's thoughts again. Denise paused, setting down a wooden spoon as she turned to face him. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms and looking at her son with the same gentle wisdom that had guided him his whole life. I think, she began slowly, choosing her words carefully, that this is an opportunity for you to build the future you deserve. But I also understand why it's hard for you to accept. Isaiah nodded, biting his lip. It just feels wrong, Mom. Like, how can I take this money from him after what he did? Doesn't it feel like I'm letting him off the hook? Denise sighed softly, walking over to sit beside Isaiah at the table. Isaiah, what Mr. Hendricks did was wrong. There's no doubt about that. But people can change. They can learn from their mistakes. And if he's offering this money to you because he genuinely wants to help make things right, maybe it's worth considering. Isaiah looked down at his hands, turning his mom's words over in his mind. He knew she was right. People could change. But could he really trust that Mr. Hendricks had changed? Or was this just a way for the old man to ease his own guilt? Denise reached out and took Isaiah's hand in hers. I think you need to decide what feels right for you. This is about your future, Isaiah, not his. Isaiah nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. He didn't have to make this decision for Mr. Hendricks, or for anyone else. He had to make it for himself. That night, Isaiah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The sounds of the neighborhood drifted in through his open window. Distant voices, the hum of cars passing by, the occasional bark of a dog. But Isaiah's mind was elsewhere, caught between the past and the future. He thought about the day he had found Mr. Hendricks' wallet. He hadn't expected anything in return when he returned it. He had just done what he knew was right. But now, this act of kindness had led to something much bigger, something far more complicated than he could have ever imagined. Could he really take the trust fund? Could he accept Mr. Hendricks' apology, even if it came in the form of money? Isaiah thought about his dreams, the dreams that had once felt so far out of reach. College, a career, a chance to make something of himself. The trust fund could make all of that possible. It could open doors that had once seemed closed to him. But it still didn't erase what had happened. The next morning, Isaiah woke up with a strange sense of clarity. He still didn't have all the answers, but he knew he needed to take control of his future. He couldn't let what had happened define him. He couldn't let the hurt and anger hold him back from the life he wanted to build. Later that day, Isaiah stood outside Mr. Hendricks' house, the same house he had walked past the day before. He had thought long and hard about coming here, but now that he was standing on the doorstep, he wasn't sure what he would say. His heart pounded in his chest as he rang the doorbell. A moment later, the door opened and Mr. Hendricks stood before him. The old man looked surprised to see Isaiah, but his expression quickly softened into something more like relief. Isaiah, Mr. Hendricks said quietly, I didn't expect to see you. Isaiah nodded, taking a deep breath. I've been thinking about your offer, he began, his voice steady but firm. And I've decided to accept it, but I want you to know something. Mr. Hendricks looked at him, his eyes wide and attentive. I'm not doing this because of the money, Isaiah continued. I'm doing it because I want to build a better future for myself. And I hope that you're offering this because you've really learned something from what happened. Mr. Hendricks nodded slowly, his voice thick with emotion. Isaiah, I know I can never take back what I did, but I want you to know that I've thought about it every day since then. I'm sorry for what I put you through. I can't change the past, but I want to do better moving forward. Isaiah studied the old man for a moment, searching his face for any signs of insincerity, but all he saw was regret and a desire to make things right. I hope you do, Isaiah said quietly, because people like me, we don't get a lot of chances, and I don't want this to be about pity or guilt. I want it to be about doing the right thing. Mr. Hendricks nodded again, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. It is, Isaiah. I promise you, it is. Isaiah took one last look at the man before him, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. The hurt was still there, but it didn't feel as heavy anymore. He had taken control of his future, and that was what mattered. Thank you, Isaiah said finally, his voice calm and sure, "for giving me this chance." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving behind the past, but carrying with him the strength of everything he had learned. And so, Isaiah's story serves as a reminder that even in the face of prejudice and misunderstanding, kindness, integrity, and forgiveness can shape a brighter future. Sometimes, the path to healing is not straightforward, but it is always worth pursuing. Thank you for joining us on Hopeful Horizon. If this story moved you, comment below, let us know where you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another inspiring story like this one.